There are library actions.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the PMI Victorian History Library. So, for those of you I've not met before, my name is Judith Ellis, and I'm President of the Library and Board Chair. And a very warm welcome to our panellists tonight, including one of the works here at the Library, and I'll introduce them very shortly. So here, our library is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded, it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Just a bit of housekeeping, facilities if you need them. Back out the door of this room, do a U-turn, and the toilets are on the other wall as you walk up the passageway on the left-hand side. And in the unlikely event of an emergency, we have two exits. One is through this door here and to the end of the passageway, and the other one is back through the doors that you enter the building. And if there was an emergency, we'd ensure that our staff escort you safely out the building. So it's a momentous occasion for the library this year. It marks our library's 170th anniversary. So we were established in 1854. We're the second oldest library in Victoria and have a collection of over 40,000 items of various sorts, and take great pride in being the sole library in Australia with such an extensive collection that's actually for loan. So you can take them home. And our focus is very much on local history, including a wealth of information encompassing most towns across Victoria. And the exhibition, the photos and drawings around this room and on the other side of this wall here, all relate to the library's history. And we've also got some books relating to or rare books in the cabinets around the room as well. So maybe afterwards have another cup of tea and a biscuit and have a look around. Jade is photographing. Jade's at the back there. So she's photographing, videoing the session this evening, and there might be other photos taken. If you don't want to be included in this sort of photography, let us know and we can accommodate that. So I'd now like to welcome our three panellists. So just here we have Ellen Coates, who is from the Victorian History Library, and Ellen is the Collections Librarian and Volunteer Coordinator. And we have Jillian Hiscock on the far side there, and Jillian is from the Royal Historical Society of Victoria, and she is the Collections Manager and also Volunteer Coordinator. How many volunteers do you have?
Oh,
roughly.
Sure, actually. They move around so much.
Yes. They're wonderful. They're wonderful.
They are.
We couldn't do without them.
Yeah. They all live wheels.
They do. And we have Anne here. Anne Holloway in the middle. And Anne's from Monash University. And Anne is a Specials Collection Curator. And so as their titles suggest, they all have experience with rare books and materials and have very kindly agreed to share their experience tonight. So rather than tell you anything more about them, I'll start the conversation with our panel experts about what they do, what their job involves, and what sort of things the organisation collects. So I'll come and sit down. And that will be my first question. So what does your job involve and what does the organisation collect? So do you want to go first?
So if you want to grab the mining tray, it just needs to be turned on. So the little slider. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Is that on?
Yeah, we're behind the speakers.
Just a favourite technology.
So I'm a reference librarian by training, but I've been working at the Royal Historical Society for the last 6 years, and my job is to oversee the entire collection, which is many moving parts. So there are books and journals, and periodicals, and manuscripts, and objects, and artwork, and maps. And I think we found a pair of swords about 6 months ago, something like that in a cupboard. And we were established in 1909, and so the collections really started from that period, but equally we took on a very large collection in 1920 or 25 from the Royal Geographical Society of Australasia, which means that we've got a cuckoo in the nest in a way, which is about exploration and discovery. And so my samples tonight, a couple of them are from that collection, which I thought was interesting. We have, when you were asking about the volunteers, I'd probably say we've got about 60 people, but some of those might only come in once a month, other people might come in twice a week. It's a real variation.
Thank you. That's right. I guess my background is maybe perhaps slightly differently. I came in from academia as a historian, but my background was also in early books and manuscripts. So I had familiarity with text. So I was started in 2018 at Monash at that point, the Rare Books collection, which was renamed Special Collections, because when we started going through it, we realized we had rare books, yes, but we also had objects, everything from medals through to pharmaceutical containers from the 1920s through to archives as well. So we define our collection as anything that is rare, fragile, beautiful, expensive, or requires special housing. So the collection's quite large. There's probably over 300,000 catalogued items, and there's certainly probably about half that again in uncatalogued material. We have the Rare Books collection, which is the history of print. It starts with our pre-1800 collection with some of our incunabula, going through to yellowbacks and penguins within the modern period. And out of that, we pull out things such as children's literature to highlight science fiction. We have a very fine comics collection from the 1950s and 60s Australia. We also collect cookbooks and recipes, and we have an extremely large Southeast Asian collection focusing on Indonesia and Cambodia with the Mel Regular collections. As you can see, it goes on and on. So we've got quite a broad collection going on there. And within our rare books, we also have a very fine French collection as part of that as well. So, and medical. Anyway, it goes on. I'll stop talking. You can always ask questions like that.
I'm the Collections Librarian and Volunteer Coordinator here, as Judith said, and you'll have seen some of our collection walking in. So we specialise in Victorian history. So the entire collection is Victorian history or Australian history as it relates to Victoria. We don't do anything outside that remit. And we are also not only books. We don't have quite the historic collection that the other two libraries do. I'd love to have some incunabula. I'm a medievalist originally, so if the board wants to give me enough money to buy an illuminated manuscript, but I think we'd have difficulty arguing the relevance. We range from books to, we have a fairly new map collection from quite a big donation. Zines, ephemera, so you can see some of our zines in the cabinet over there, and some of the ephemeras down the back. That includes some contemporary collecting, so like during the COVID pandemic, when I got vaccinated, I kept my "You've been vaccinated" sticker, and that's now in the collection. So that kind of really small scale local stories. We also do have a lot of books. We've got more than 40,000 items on site, and all our collection is here. And we also collect the periodicals of pretty much every historical society in Victoria, and they're indexed on our catalogue. So not all our collection is rare. Some of it we buy new material as well. So we have Australian fiction, so it's written by an Australian and set in Australia. And we have that as part of the general collection. It's one of our higher use items too. But it also acts as a repository of Australian fiction that can be quite difficult to find after a few years. So we collect material that is becoming rare or will become rare as well. So we try to do a bit of everything. Part of our new collection policy has been recognising that stories are told in many formats, and we've also moved into video, which has been quite interesting.
Thank you so much. And you started talking about how you define rare books, and you gave quite a clear definition there. Do you want to repeat that again, perhaps expand on it a bit more, and then perhaps Ellen and Jillian can have a go at it?
Thank you. So the definition, it's all right. So our working definition for special collections as a whole is anything that is rare, so hard to find, and that can be anything that's 20th century, 19th century, 10th century, a span of options. Fragile, so we do have a large ephemera collection, but we also have our pulps, so are obviously very fragile, just as much as our 19th and 18th century texts. Beautiful, so we do collect prints and artwork, hard to find and requiring special storage. So often, as we are a university library, we also have some theses have come in from, say, the physics department with very weirdly shaped models. We can't hold them elsewhere, so we often also get the remit of holding the weirdly shaped things, such as one of the former vice chancellor chairs that turned up in the collection as well. So that's it. But in terms of more traditional rare books, we wanted to keep the former rare book collection sort of name alive within special collections. So we decided to name the general collection, the history of print, which covers everything from the pre-1800 through the rare books collection, and then pull out highlights from it so that people find it a bit more accessible. And so after a lot of sort of debate and to and fro, that's how we went with that. But we have a very broad, definition, I think, of what it is.
Maybe to Ellen. Yeah. How would you define?
We're probably fairly similar. So fragile, very hard to replace, and anything that is in some way not always expensive. We have a lot of rare material that costs nothing, pretty much, like some of our ephemera in particular. I've just picked up from a tourist information place, and in 20 years, no one is going to have it. I think probably fragile and just irreplaceable. So if you can't find another copy of it easily, then we would start classing it as rare. So obviously a lot of our 19th century material, some of it is surprisingly not as rare as some of the more contemporary stuff, because we have a lot of material where someone has written their family history, they've printed it at Officeworks, they did 4 copies, gave 3 to their family and 1 to us. So we have quite a bit of that sort of stuff. So I think its scarcity is probably our defining characteristic.
I'll try and speak loudly to say this is going to, so it doesn't need to be old.
No,
Okay.
absolutely not. So, the technical definition of a rare book can be pre-1800. If you're talking about how you're going to catalogue it. Like I did the amazing rare book cataloguing course that Anne was at as well, and there's a whole completely different standard that Anne can speak in a lot more detail than I can, because we don't use it because we don't have pre-1800 material. So technical definition of a rare book would be pre-1800. But for us, because we can't apply that remit, we apply it to anything that's scarce. So anything that we can't easily replace.
This is quite interesting. I think for me, all of those things would apply. And in looking at material, I often look at the context of the production of it as well. So for me, we've got a copy of the Ferguson Index, which is the books published in Australia, and that lists some very early publications. I will hunt out the Ferguson number and pop it into the catalogue record. I also check to see print runs. I check to see which edition the material is. So there might be something that's printed published in the US and Sydney, or might have been published in Glasgow, and so some of those things play a part in how I look at the material. It's not going to be that I'll reject it, it just adds to the interest of the material and the provenance and the context of it. So I think for me, it is about the uniqueness of the material, what's the context, who's the author, is there copies around? And I agree with you that given that a lot of collections, the collecting institutions do not have the space to retain long runs of material anymore, it does mean that there is going to be a portion of publications and material in other formats which will become rarer and rarer to put your hands on. The other thing that I see is rare is what could be called grey literature. So a little bit, which for me is the non-commercially published material, which might be a consultant's report or just something that is not commonly handed out. As you said, family history is in that way, but there is a lot of other material that works in that way as well. So the purist would say that the lovely, and one of the examples I've brought is a rebound copy of, I forgot the name of the person. See, short-term memory loss. When you get to my age, it's just going to be so hard for you. One of the books that I brought was published in the 1700s. It's rare. There's not a lot of copies around of the original edition, but it is. It's not uncommon either, so it kind of flips around in that way. So I think I just would add to what you're saying, but add my little flavours of the other things that I put the lens on the material. And we have things like that don't fit as rare books as such, but you're quite right, it isn't just that. We have illuminated addresses or trowels that we use for the, and a range of things which are one-offs. So for me, that makes them very valuable in many ways.
Yeah.
So you become libraries, archives and museums, don't you?
Absolutely.
In so many ways, yes.
Absolutely.
Materials include objects.
Yeah.
So how do you source your rare materials? Would it be, as it would be with the library to some extent, donations? What would be other mechanisms?
For us, it is donations. We don't have a book budget as such, so it is the material that gets donated. We've got a really good core collection of material that was gathered quite early on in our history, but even now and still we get material that comes in, and the kind of collections that we have, and you may know yourselves, you get material that was found in the skip. You get material that was found on the side of the road. You get material that was cleaned out of the house that somebody's cleaning up for the family. And quite often in those, there's little treasures in there that you hadn't expected to find. So for us, we don't have a budget to go out and add to the collection, but we do keep our eye out for all of those things and grab them and pounce on them. I hide them away in my office.
Your office sounds very exciting.
Oh.
We do have a budget for acquisition. It's not a huge budget, but it's certainly a budget. So we are actively looking for completing runs that we already have. We actively collect fine bindings. So we try to distribute the money across the different parts of the collection. And I keep a small pot for we've been looking for that for a while, and I find it. So things like, the Melbourne Rare Books Fair is really nice because at least the books are there in person. But we also, I communicate with a wide variety of dealers in Australia and across the world. Specifically, we have a separate budget for cookbooks because they're expensive, not. So we have a separate budget for cookbooks, so I'm always looking for interesting things. So our cooking collection is Australian and British, but within the context of France and Germany and America. So to sort of look at the broader history of food within Australia. So I'm always looking for interesting community cookbooks. So again, donations, but also manuscripts and other historical things. So I think our earliest one at the moment is 1755. So acquiring, as under special collections, we also have the Aid Ruth benefaction, which is our Slavic languages benefaction to the library, and they have also matched our budget for Slavic languages rare books. So we do a lot of collecting of 19th and 20th century Ukrainian, Belarusian, Poland, Georgian, and Central European materials, which is an exciting world. We do get donations, small and large. We're approached by a wide variety, often through referral through other institutions. We don't always take them, and I was just sort of saying recently there's been a bit of a space cleanup around the university, so we've got a lot of people trying to find homes for their collection from their offices across the university. So, and also through the alumni network of the university as well. So we do get references from there. So it's a bit of a scattershot approach, really, for us, which is always exciting to see new things.
You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, we're a bit of a mixture as well. So I do have an acquisitions budget. It's not ginormous, but it's perfectly good because I use it to buy new material as well as our rare stuff. A lot of our rare material comes from the networks that I've built. So I'm on every available mailing list that could possibly, particularly like small community stuff. I've got 3 books on the history of trees and birds and insects in Druin, because I was on the Facebook group of Friends of Druin Trees and they posted it there, and they're just not available anywhere else. So it's building those communities that really helps us find a lot of this stuff. Because for me, I am the acquisitions department as well as collections. We don't have anyone else doing it. So if I don't know about a book, I can't buy it. So, but we also get a lot of donations. So as I mentioned, our map collection, that was entirely by donation. One of our members is downsizing and he's given us 2 big cabinets full of maps on Australia and Victoria, and they're just amazing. Top up there is a 1935 World War, just pre-World War II survey map of Sorrento. So I can get that out and show anyone that wants to have a look at it. But we also work on just random donations. Like we'll get some quite big ones of people that are downsizing, but I had someone walk in off the street about 2 months ago with a box full of very early 1900s rent books from Brighton. And he found them under the bed of a deceased estate in Geelong, and he wouldn't tell me what the estate was called or who it was. I rang him later and he still wouldn't tell me. So I don't really know where they came from, but I put them on our Instagram, and a rental historian from, I think, La Trobe Uni came and looked at them, and she got really excited and told me all about the real estate agent, and I've now got a volunteer index in them. So they'll be keyword searchable in our catalogue, but it's things like that where you have weatherboard house, 5 shillings, and it contains a drawing room and a stables and an inside toilet, because this was a big innovation. So yeah, it's the really small scale local stuff that we care about. And as I said, our ephemera collection, that comes from whenever I'm travelling anywhere, I raid the Tourist Information Office.
Me too.
Again, yeah, and I've got Jay doing it now as well. So I walk out with like every map, every brochure, everything that's sort of talking about this local stuff, because this is collecting rare material for the future. And I attend things like the Rare Book Fair. Melbourne Art Book Fair is really good because that's where you get all the art books that I have like a print run of 3. And Sticky Institute's big zine fair in February. That's our zine collection is growing dramatically, which I think is exciting.
We're trying to cut down our zine collection.
I mean, thinking of ephemera, plus of course other things, who comes to use the materials? And I'm thinking specifically to you on like ephemera, and how do they find them? How do they get access to them? So not just only ephemera, of course, but that's just an example that jumps out at me.
Let's pass the microphone. We index everything into the catalogue. For any cataloguers, we put it all at the 500 field, which is a general note, and it means it's keyword searchable. So that's how most people find our stuff. They'll get on the catalogue, look up something obscure. My favourite example is I had a lady come in wanting to know about a particular mansion in Mount Eliza. And because we'd indexed a 1963 periodical for the National Trust, the CWA had visited it, I was able to pull up the periodical and say, here's an article in this mansion that was demolished in the 1970s. So for us, it's getting as much information that's keyword searchable on the catalogue as possible. As for who uses it, whole range of people. We've got a really strong case of historians, tour guides. We get a lot of heritage architects. So like when we went into COVID, all the heritage consultants and heritage architects all turned up on the day we went into lockdown, and they were all wandering around going, oh, I haven't seen you for ages, and getting involved. So we get a lot of material that way, and we get a lot of people that are just really interested in history. We've got quite a few historical fiction writers, and a lot of family historians. So a significant portion of people that use our collection and access our rare material are family historians.
So we are a university library. So our primary audience is researchers and students at the university, but we are also open to the general public. So anybody can come and use us and request materials. Even if you can't loan through the catalogue, you can always contact us and request. So we've had, our cataloguing is an exciting mess, shall we say. The front-facing search engine doesn't necessarily throw our material out very fast. So we're often a little bit hidden, and we've been working on that in the last year to make this better. And we are working on actually getting a proper digital repository. So we're perhaps a little bit underutilized by the university. Part of my job as curator is basically to go out and be like, come use this, hey, I've got this cool thing. So I spend a lot of time going to classes, talking to researchers, and trying to also match up our collection in a way that researchers can approach it and understand what they're getting. We do get a lot of, because we are obviously in Trove and WorldCat, we do get a lot of queries from around the world. Researchers who just pull up something and be like, oh my gosh, you've got this one thing, whether it's 2 yellowbacks in the middle of nowhere, Chinese propaganda pamphlet from 1970, and someone flies out to Australia to see it. We also get referrals from other institutions, so come and look at Monash's copy, it might be easier to access, sometimes maybe not. And local researchers who know that we have particular collections that they use. Often these are the music collections or our medical collections because they're quite extensive. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Or queries of people just sort of asking, could you just check the inscription on this particular page for us? So we've recently had Mel Rickliff and the Indonesian collections. We do get a lot of requests for use of the documentaries within there, in particular around Cambodia, for documentary filmmakers. So we've just been going out and outsourcing our digitization so that we have high quality to send them. Because a lot of this comes from the personal collection of King Sihanouk himself. So we have that kind of request coming in as well. And we work in tandem with Monash Archives to deal with the other queries. So we're still gathering our forces, shall we say.
We would have similar inquiries to PMI. I suppose for me one of the trends in the last few years has been a lot of people have been wanting to look at our primary source material about Aboriginal and First Nations inhabitation of certain areas. Gippsland in particular has been of interest to a couple of groups. Dandenong around the police paddock is there, but overall the Murray River area. And so for me that's meant that I've been rethinking how we actually manage that material and make sure that it's appropriately available. Most of it is the bulk of it is material and reminiscences that have been written by European people in Australia. But I think that's been an interesting sidebar in a way to the collection. The other thing is we've got a couple of really interesting collections. So the Robertson Confectionery Company, we've got a nice little collection of that material, and that does get used quite a bit. Being on that side of town near Fitzroy, where the confectionery company was, it just means that we, as well as a couple of the other collecting institutions, find that that collection is used quite nicely. It also includes lollies because there's trays of trays of samples which are in glass tubes, like laboratory tubes, with seals on them. And I'm told because it's mostly toffees that
Still
they're
good.
okay. But it does mean I think we are all in that stage where we need to make sure our collections are visible to you as users, and that is a professional preoccupation.
100%.
Working our way around the products we use to make it, how we catalogue things, how we make it visible, how we make sense of it to you so that it's useful, and because we don't like blocking information away. That's the worst thing you could possibly do. So I think that's an important one. Yes.
Do you have, to some extent you've touched on this, but do you have material in the collection that you're calling or calling rare, if you like, but it might not normally be thought to be such, but you would say it isn't treated as it is? And maybe I can link that with a question about the digital world. So what we're producing now may well be rare in the future, and how that's going to be identified and selected. I don't have the answer to that, I'll throw that to you. But that's probably an example of having things in your collection that are rare, but might not be thought of as such.
That's very true. I suppose that to me is two parts, because I have concerns about the future, the digital future of information, and I'll pick that up in a second. But we have, because we've been involved in the process of the Victorian Community History Awards for some years in liaison with PROV, one of the things we've got out of that is a number of CDs, USBs, which have unique material on them. So it might be oral histories, which were done for a project at the time and then submitted into the VCHA activity. It might be, just photographs of a particular exhibition that was held at the time, which no longer exists. And to me, that becomes a rare piece of information, but also something which records in the moment a set of, that event. And that means that it's important and it's rare and it's important to protect. I have a sense of interest in, I suppose, in the digital future, in that we know that a lot of the formats that we're saving things in, we don't know. One of the books I brought with me is 1797. I don't know whether an archive PDF is going to be around in 300 years. And for me, part of that is we need to be able to keep reformatting that material. And that's a whole other conversation, I think, which is a very interesting one. And I think that one's going to be an interesting conversation.
The wonders of digital preservation. So, we have ephemera. A lot of people don't think about that as being particularly rare, even though you can't replace it. But we do have remit to collect digital born items. So these are things that are created digitally and have never been in print. And Impact 2025 is the project trying to conserve formats on magnetic tape, so VHS and cassettes, because they're about to start going off in an excitingly vinegar type way. And we've noticed when we've got to digitize, there is decay happening in our collection, so we've been stirring ourselves towards digitizing all our audio-visual material, and things such as 20 years of interviews with, say, Cambodian monks talking about healing manuscripts. And so we have a number of the palm leaf manuscripts themselves, but they mostly, by and large, don't exist because they boil them down to treat patients. So, in fact, the only extant copy is, in fact, the photocopy or the digital version that's been filmed. So these perhaps wouldn't be considered rare in the traditional sense, but in terms of cultural preservation, it's vitally important. So we're still working out how to do this. It's new as of last year, but it's part of our remit. So it's just making sure that we're allocating budget and working with our digitisation team who are set there to help us do this type of thing on how to do formats, how to do the preservation, working with Monash University archives who have the same question, perhaps on a larger scale because they have to archive all the digital Monash material, and sort of taking part in like Preservica, which is the big digital preserving communities. But other things also, we put on exhibitions. We have a gallery in the library, and often we work with the arts, architecture, and design students to create our own ephemera, to create our own audio-visual material. So it's working out how do we preserve even our own history as well as thinking about things like receipts and the small bits and pieces that float through the collection. There's a lot going on. So we're still funneling our way around in terms of the digital sense. And we have more people saying, hey, I've got all this artwork that I've created and here's digital files, where do I put it? Or here's these old stories and testimonies I have. Or we're creating interviews when we go out to do curation and like where do we record the context for collections coming in. So
I think I've spoken a bit about some of our stuff that we have that wouldn't normally be considered rare, so I think I'll answer more of a digital question. We have quite a bit of digital material, probably not compared to quantity-wise, but we've got more than 6,000 electronic items, and that's growing. We run into a couple of interesting issues. One of them is I'm having a real problem at the moment with early 2000s CD-ROMs. Where historical societies put together these incredibly creative CD-ROMs that now don't run on any modern operating system whatsoever. We get around this by having one laptop that's still running Windows Vista. So it turns on, it does battery no longer works, but if you put these CD-ROMs in it, they will play. So I've also been contacting, there's a really fun DVD of stories of the Heidelberg Olympic Village. And I go through and do spot checks of all our CD-ROMs every year to see what I can still play and what doesn't. And this one I only managed to play on my computer by downloading a 1993 version of QuickTime. So I emailed the council and said, do you have another copy of this anywhere in any other format? And they just said no. So unless we can get it off this DVD, which we can't really, then that will eventually become lost. So we upgrade as much as we can. Whenever we can move material off hard copy digital formats, we do. An excellent example is tonight's talk is being filmed and it will go into our collection. I will catalogue it and it will be on Trove next week, depending on how much time I have. But yeah, we also have a lot of born digital material. More and more people are writing books in born digital formats. We have a lot of PDFs, got quite a big ebook collection. We've actually just literally this week got a digital repository, so a lot of our material, the stuff we can do within copyright, is going to be available to you from home, which we're really, really excited about. There'll be a link on the catalogue to be able to click it and you'll be able to access the materials. So that's all our heritage studies, means we can start scanning some of the ephemera too. My current sort of bête noire is collecting streaming material. We're an old library in that we want to own everything. We don't have a subscription to anything because we can't afford it and because it's not specific enough for us. But it is almost impossible to collect digital material that's not being put out on DVD. I started doing this because of the Queer Australia documentary on ABC. It was put on iView, which is fantastic. They have not released it on DVD at all. The National Film and Sound Archive has a copy, but they can't sell the copy to me because it's within ABC copyright. And ABC is treating my request as a pay per minute documentary footage request. And I've been waiting for 6 months and they've fired all their librarians. They have 2 librarians left of 54. So the digital repository is managing itself, which is tremendously fun. But basically the upshot is there's going to be hours, and this era now is going to be lost because it is streaming stuff that is just not being sent to repositories because our legal deposit laws haven't caught up. So I'm trying to do it on a really small scale. I'm buying everything I can, and I'm buying DVDs and digitizing them because we're allowed to do that within copyright law. and then we're keeping an eye on the formats and upgrading where I can. And we do spot checks on all our stuff. We do have some VHS, and we actually have a digitisation donation campaign going at the moment to help us digitise the VHS and hopefully some of our microfilm and microfiche too, so we can make that available more easily.
Print things out.
Yes.
I do.
There are some, not many, but there are some companies that will do some of those conversions for you from
Yeah.
old.
It takes
Yeah.
money,
I
unfortunately.
know, I recently had, tell you something about my age, and I'm only 32. Recently had a company digitise 2 reel-to-reel films, which were taken immediately before my family left England. And so we're talking about 1960s here. Remind you, I'm 32. And we came out on one of those big passenger ships, last the 10-pound ponds, and pictures of us on the ship and all the things that we were doing as kids. And they managed to do that for us, which was quite amazing. I really hadn't expected that was going to be retrieval. These are just films that Dad took. We used to set up the projector and watch them, and I've got a box of this stuff. Thought, oh, I know what's on here. How am I going to access it? And we can now.
Yeah.
To some extent, you've talked about this, but how do you look after these rare materials? We talked about digital preservation, and clearly, you know, we need techniques for doing that. And there's lots of there are standards around, there are groups around to support those causes, there are projects, programs, seminars, all sorts of things, but you still need to actually do it. So aside, if you like, from the digital area, how do you actually look after them? Do you have special conditions, or are they just part of the collection generally?
We do have our rare materials separated out, but in a way it's just part of the collection because we're in a historic building. The air conditioning, everything else is iffy at best. But we've got a preventative conservation plan in place which tries to identify, well, it does identify the things we do to stabilise the collection as much as possible. We've got a couple of volunteers who can make boxes to put things in, so if the spines are broken but we haven't got the money to conserve it, we'll have a box to put it in. We use tissue paper between pages and against photos, or well, not photos, but etchings or anything where the ink's going to bleed a little bit. I use acid-free book covering quite frequently when I've got things on the shelves because that protects the covers from the wear and tear. It's a working collection, so the material isn't tucked away anywhere and not touched. In fact, I want it touched as much as possible. So for me, it was stabilising the material. We're very good users of white linen tape to hold things together, like Christmas parcels. You know? We get people to wash their hands when they're accessing the material. We use cradles to hold them so the spines are supported. If people are using them, we've got sets of weighted beads that will hold the pages open. So we've got a number of things in place that just reduce the wear and tear on the material and the wear and tear as it sits on the shelves as well. Yeah.
When I began the collection was all in one storage area, which is our primary controlled storage area, and deeply overcrowded. So over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, I've been petitioning the library to help with the storage. We did a full revaluation of the collection and proved to them that the value of the actual overall Monash special collections is we are technically the largest cultural collection on campus. We are larger than the Museum of Art as well in terms of cost. So they started putting more money towards storage and housing. So as part of this, we commissioned a conservation company to come in and do a full assessment and put together a 5-year recommended plan for how to do it, being that we can't really change our storage spaces until someone gives us a large amount of money. You know, the old story. So how we can best do this. So improving the ventilation. We did have, in the bushfires of 2019-2020, we did have the rather disturbing realization that where the chill storage is the library was filled with smoke, but the most smoke was in the Red Bull collection. So I'm like, as we gently smoke our books, we have solved that problem. It doesn't smoke anymore. We've improved that ventilation in there. And we also sectioned off 2 other parts of the library greater storage, changed their controls. We built a wall, very exciting for security. So now we have secure storage that's temperature controlled down there as well for our uncatalogued material. And in the last library restructure, I had, because it was me doing most of the preservation, so most of the rehousing and most of looking after the books, we hired a collection care team. So they look after the collection now. They are the ones who go and do the pest trapping. They look after all the Monash collections, but in particular special collections. And we now have sort of a professional dust vacuum, and we worked with the chemistry faculty recently to commission our own study into poison books. So looking at particular British 19th century books, that was our sample, looking at arsenic, mercury, and lead within bindings. And one of their PhD students pioneered a new technique at reading it. So now we've got some quite strict protocols around handling of certain types of cloth-bound books, because we discovered that the lead is flaking off into the dust in the collection. So we've now got lead hand wash and all sorts of things so that we can make sure to keep our staff safe. The reading room is a controlled area, so people, if they come to use the collection, we set it out, the books out for them, give them instructions on how to use the materials, make sure they're washing their hands and not, using their phone as a weight or, I don't know, eating the book or something like that. More for their sake than the books, to be honest. And there are some items that we won't loan out that are too fragile, and so they are high on our list for preservation just in general. And there's some that are just too fragile. So we've been doing a bit of work making a high priority conservation list. So when we do have funding for collection care, that we don't have an in-house conservator, but we can send them off. So things like our first edition Darwin needed a bit of love and care. So we send it off. We have Ferdinand von Muller's education books that he collected. So
we had the original copies. I found a list in our archives that said we had them, and they were part of the stock that was listed as very damaged and destroyed and were burnt, I believe, in the early 1900s.
Yeah,
or
that's sad.
sold.
So ours aren't burnt or sold. But they were sitting in open-ended plastic cases, and for those of you who don't know what these are, they're filled with plant samples, like actual plant samples, from the Botanic Gardens and from his explorations around Victoria. So we've got conservators working, and they've worked on the ones that I think are at one of the other institutions. So they're working on setting those so that we can preserve them for longevity. But we've also worked on digitizing them for the BHL, the Biological Heritage Library. So finally, the collection's beginning to look less distressing to me. So I'm like, whoo, we can lie back a little bit.
So as I said, all our stuff's on site. We have about half the collection up here and about half of it is in our stacks, which is downstairs, which isn't open to the public. So members of the public can access the books that are in there, but the staff member goes and gets it for them. So our really rare, fragile stuff is down there basically, because while it's I stopped looking at the humidity indicator because it was distressing me, but at least it stays the same temperature and humidity, whereas up here we've got staff, we've got members, we've got windows, so the temperature fluctuates a lot, which is not ideal for paper collections. The advantage of paper is that as long as you keep a sort of fairly close eye on it, as long as you don't actively do something to harm it, it will probably be okay. So we operate on that to an extent. I've also got a volunteer going through all of our 19th century books to work out what needs repair and what doesn't. We've got, we did run a crowdfunding campaign the year before last to repair some of our more fragile 19th century ones. One of my favourites is the Victoria in 1880. It's actually in the cabinet over there. And I like that one because listed in the back are the subscribers who got the book printed, and we're one of them, which I thought was really lovely. So the spine had fallen off that one, so we employed it. We raised about $3,000 to get that and some of our other 19th century books conserved. I've also worked with a conservation company who did our disaster plan to get the really big map book that's up the back over there. It's a South Melbourne map plans that was donated to us. The librarian donated it to us, told me it had black mold and said you might just like to scan the pages and then throw it. But I worked with this particular conservation group and they kindly donated some time, and I used a little bit of my collection budget to get it. Usually black, if you see black mold in the collection, unless it's really, really, really valuable, you just get rid of the book. Yeah, it's not worth the risk, but these folks knew what they were doing. So they've conserved it properly and it's now accessible, which it wouldn't have been. And there's not, some of it's been digitised in the State Library, but it's still really nice to have in-house so you can see physically how the book worked as well. So I guess my answer is we do what we can within the resources that we have. So we check what we can, and we, touch wood, fingers crossed, haven't had a bad pest problem. And it's partly, I think, because people are usually pretty careful with our stuff, and we don't allow food anywhere near any of it. I did have to have a chat with some of the volunteers about eating lunch and snacks. Just don't want to encourage crumbs. And yeah, we just check books as they come in, and if you see any issues, then people report them to me, and we see what we can do with a particular book and check the spread. So yeah, we're keeping an eye as we can as we go.
I'm just going to finish off this part of the conversation with a sort of a double-sided question here, and then throw it open to everybody else to ask questions. What would be your favourite in your collection, your favourite rare book or material? And what would be the one thing that you would say to people that they need to know about working with rare books and their materials? So what's your favourite? What's the one takeaway you'd give?
My favourite is something that we found wrapped in dirty plastic at the bottom of the compactors a couple of years ago, and it turned out to be a 1719 atlas that had been bought by one of the Royal Geographical Society members in London at the time, and it looks like a beaten up old dog. The covers are beaten up. The maps are exquisite. It came in and it was mended by the volunteers in the society with membership forms on all the folds, but luckily whatever glue they used hasn't bled through. The Herman Moll was a Dutch-Belgian geographer who lived in London, and was part of the coffee set that included pirates and privateers and traders and authors and a whole range of things, and he got a lot of information from those people, and it reflects in his maps. They are just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful things. And he didn't, the maps don't fold in half. What he's got is the gatefold style, which means they fold in from the middle. And I just love it. And there are a few copies around. Half the maps are missing. That's what I mean. It's like a beaten up old dog, but it's the most beautiful thing. And you can tell it's been used. You can tell it's had a life. You can tell it's been something that people have valued a lot. And so that to me is my favourite. But there's buckets of favourites in my collection. And what was the second?
Takeaway. What's your one takeaway?
What's the takeaway?
Working with
look, for me, as I said, the type of collection, and we have, it's a working collection, and for me it is that I want people to know how to use them. I do find that younger people often don't know how to navigate around the book. They don't know how to use an index. They don't know. For me, it's about understanding how that works, getting a sense of the paper. Paper is rag paper. It's not chemical paper. It's just got a texture of its own. And that they are so chock full of information that's really important to know about. So I suppose it seems so obvious to me that I'm having trouble answering the question properly. I'm thinking, well, of course.
The one question I don't like, because I'm very fickle. Whatever I'm looking at is my favourite, really. Well, in some ways, and I think it's sort of a hold on me not to have a favourite in a lot of ways, because I am trying to promote the collection, and for me it's understanding whether it's the circulating library, which is a collection of books that's circulated in libraries around Melbourne, the across the 20th century, or whether it's a manuscript fragment from the 12th century, is that each one of them is unique and fascinating and interesting and has so much context behind it and so many ways of thinking about and intersecting with the rest of the collections. And that to me is actually what I love about the collections as a whole. So it's the way they come together and build together that is my favorite component, I suppose. And then I could just give you an endless list of things that I love in the collection. I guess that's my takeaway, is that they're entities unto themselves. It's not just individual items or beautiful, fragile things. That one thing I'm always trying to get students, or no matter whether they're historians or literary studies, or whether they're design students or researchers, is to think laterally about the collection, to think about how parts might intersect and use it as a place of inspiration, just as much as a place of like, oh, I know I want this one book. But I'm like, well, how about you think about this particular segment or this particular layer of the collection and how that might help you as well. And as a researcher, it's also how I try to think about collections when I go back to my own work, which I think is really important.
Yes, I agree with both of those. So I do, it's not necessarily a favourite item, but I've been asked sort of like, what would I grab if the building was on fire? The answer is the invitation that's in that case over there. So it's printed on silk, and it's the invitation to the opening of our original building from 1857. And I love it partly because it's printed on silk, partly because it's such an integral part of the story of this library and where we've come from, but also because we had no idea it existed until 2014. When a New Zealand engineering company rang us and said, we found this in 3 pieces in a drawer, would you like it? Which we said yes, and they posted it to us. And we paid to get it restored, and it's now housed in its special box with its the box built for it, and I bring it out for these events, and it's shiny and it's really pretty. And it's just, for me, it encapsulates what this place is and what the collection is. So as much as it's a beautiful individual item, it's also, it tells the story of the whole collection. And I think for me, what I want everyone to take away is Rare Books, it's not an ivory tower. That everyone, if you're part of an institution, go and look at your Rare Books collection. Like I remember when I was at Monash, I got so excited when I found an excuse to go and look at the Rare Books collection, but you don't need an excuse. Just, really, if you want to go and poke an illuminated manuscript, you might need an excuse. But generally, just go and ask. Librarians aren't scary people. We're all, as you can see, extremely enthusiastic about our collections. So we'll happily show you them at length and at great depth. Yeah, like please look at everything. So yeah, just get involved, find out what's there. And yeah, I agree with Anne, think laterally. I've spent a lot of time trying to explain to family historians why they can't just write so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. Like, please look at our entertainment resources, and here's these books on natural history. Look at the painting of what this town might have looked like. So trying to get everyone to use all the different parts of the collection to tell as complex a story as possible.
One of my favorite things we ever did was pull out some books on plants and biology for a bunch of primary school grade 6s at Dandin on primary school. So these are mostly refugees, mostly new to the country. And so they've been working with Mama and a couple of other of the art schools out there to sort of work out how to explore the Australian landscape through art. And we had them making bark books, so I went and collected a whole bunch of bark, so they made their own using inspiration from our collections. And so, you know, these are our 18th and 19th century books that they were drawing inspiration from in order to sort of create their own artwork. So there are no barriers, really.
Questions?
You speak loud.
Yeah.
I think I might have actually spoken to Anne about this a couple of years ago when I was in the reading room for my honours for Glorious Revolution, going through pamphlets and pamphlets and pamphlets. I got the whole reading room to myself that day, so that was nice. I feel like quite a celebrity. My question was, and I think it might be different for each of you, is how